Mike Browning is a name that you should recognize from Morbid Angel, Nocturnus, Nocturnus A.D., After Death, and Incubus. Not the shitty pardon me one, but one of the various awesome ones from the metal underground. So I want to remind everybody, I am Reaper, and on ReaperMetalProductions.com you can find every Into the Darkness interview, whether it be the video version or the audio version. It is all conveniently linked up on the website, and you can also grab a t-shirt or explore our fan club and become on Patreon and become one of the people that could ask interview questions on Into the Darkness episode. And we do have some fans wanting to ask Mike some questions, so we will be getting to that here soon. But first, I want to kick it off with something down and nerdy, and that's about recording, because recently on the channel we had Scott Burns from Morrisound Studio, and Scott Burns is legendary for what everybody should definitely know that name for, especially if you know who Mike is. So then, that's the kind of the world of the way where my question kind of formulates is here, you know, you're in the death metal world and then going to Morrisound Studio and in Florida, but you're on more the other side of that where you're going to with what's one of the Morris brothers. So it's like, you know what I mean, it's a different production, but also a production that's also very much kind of like Scott Burns, where it's like iconic, but definitely different to the engineer that's doing it. So what kind of landed you to go more with one of the Morris brothers as opposed to maybe more like pressure could have had even been on yourself with death metal, and then to go, you know, at Morrisound and not be with Scott Burns?
Well, the whole thing really was when we signed to Earache, Digby wanted us to record with Tom Morris because he did the Morbid Angel record, the first one, you know. And so when we went in there, he said, you know, I would have rather had like Jim or Scott myself, because I like Jim's mixes a lot. I like what he did, like with the Nasty Savage stuff, Jim Morris.
Yeah.
And of course I like all of Scott's stuff. So I wanted to have either one of them do it, and Digby was just adamant about having Tom do it because Tom did the Morbid Angel record. So we kind of it was like we didn't really have a choice. And not that I don't like Tom or anything, it had nothing to do with that. It was, I didn't know that much stuff that Tom had done compared to that I listened to, that compared to like Scott or Jim. So I probably would have picked Jim just because I really liked what he did with stuff. But Scott is a really great guy too, and he really, like, I've been in there watching some other bands record, you know, Death and, you know, stuff like that when other bands were there, and I came in there and hung out with people, and man, he would stay there literally all night and just work on stuff. And you know, if their session ended at midnight, a lot of times they'll stay there till 3 or 4 in the morning, just because they were really going at it, you know, and didn't want to quit. The problem with Tom Morris was he was like a clock watcher. You know, if our session ended at 12, there's the watch, you know. It was like, you know, so I don't think we stayed late very often with him, you know, and kind of worked overtime. So it was kind of more clinical with Tom. And you know, so I mean, he did really good, and for some reason I don't know why, but our record definitely doesn't really sound like a Morrisound recording. The key, you know, I think Thresholds sounds more like a Morrisound recording, but the key just does not.
No, yeah, because definitely the drums, I would say, are kind of well, because I like Iced Earth, and like, admittedly, I don't know the Nocturnus stuff as well as I do, and so I was getting more up to speed with as I do the Iced Earth records, that is. So I was getting up to speed for this interview and listening up, and you know, and it's been a few months since I heard it. I had no idea that when it came to Nocturnus, like, then there was Nocturnus A.D., but then in between that, or not in between that, there's After Death. And I had and then, you know, obviously Nocturnus A.D., Nocturnus After Death. So is there somehow a correlation between Nocturnus, Nocturnus A.D., presumably those two, but then After Death?
Well, with Nocturnus, of course, most people know that I sang on the key, but I didn't sing on Thresholds. And that was another thing that Earache wanted us to get a front man, or actually have me quit playing drums and sing for the second record, because when we went to tour for the key, I guess the biggest complaint was that nobody moved around on stage, and I was behind this huge drum set singing, and there was really not much to see, you know, when we played live. So, you know, Dig said, oh, for the second record, you know, I want either Mike to sing and quit playing drums and be the front man, or you guys get a front man. And I was totally against it, you know, and everybody else was like, well, yeah, you know, if we get a front man, we're going to get bigger. And at the time, Dream Theater was getting really popular, and half the guys in the band wanted to be the next Dream Theater, you know?
Yeah.
And I wasn't really, I like Dream Theater, don't get me wrong, especially the early stuff, but that's not what I wanted to do, you know? And with the Key, I wrote a lot, like the last 4 songs are a story, you know? I wanted to continue that story on the next album. So when I didn't end up singing on, it was like a vote. Everybody voted against me. I wanted to keep things the way they were. And Earache actually really put the pressure on us. They said, if you want a bigger budget, get a front man. If you want a smaller budget for your second record, stay the way you are. If you want a video, and you have to remember, this is 91.
Right.
So Headbangers Ball was just getting really popular. And Earache also said, well, I know you guys, you know, we're going to get you a video that will be on Headbangers Ball. And if you don't get a singer, we're not going to pay for a video. So they kind of strong-armed us into either me sing, and I really didn't want to sing and not play drums, because I'm really more of a drummer than a singer. Right. You know, when it comes down to it. But I didn't want to quit playing drums either, you know? So I was against it, but we ended up getting a singer. And at that point, everybody started writing lyrics, you know, the new singer, and plus the keyboard player wanted to write a bunch of lyrics, and the dog there. So, you know, things changed a lot from the first record to the second record, and not one song on the first record got continued lyric wise on the second record.
So was that something that was constantly pressure for you? Because this is not the first time that you would have done vocals and drums.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, with Earache, it was really just the matter of the way we looked live. You know, they thought we could get a lot bigger if we had a front. And which, I mean, it could have happened that way. Yeah. You know, but we get a front man, and we got somebody that really did a good job, and we tried to get him to sound not too far away from what we were, but still the style changed. The lyrics changed quite a bit, and nothing continued from the first record like I wanted it to. So, I mean, I had all kinds of ideas where to take the story, you know, from Empire Sands, you know, and Destroying the Manger and stuff like that. It was a story.
Did you
kind of like, well, Iced Earth does stories, but they do it per album. Yeah. You know, this would continue on the next record, but it didn't get a chance to. So I always kind of had wanted to do that. But when I did After Death, I didn't really want that to be Nocturnus. I wanted it to be something, you know, completely different. So even though it was kind of similar, it really was kind of different. The lyrics were more about the occult and magic rather than the story like of the Key and stuff like that. But then when I decided, I think it was 2010, something around there. I think it was 2012 or 2013, right around there. I decided to do, I guess it was late 2012, early 2013, something like that.
I decided check you in the background.
I decided to do not the Nocturnus AD thing, you know, and where I could continue the lyrics. And that was really the whole point. I wanted it to be different than After Death, but the thing was, it was all the same people. After Death and Nocturnus AD were the exact same people in the band. Right. So, but I wanted to continue the lyric stories more than anything else, and I wanted it to sound like the Key, basically, you know, that style, not the songs exactly, but the style. So when I decided to do Nocturnus AD, and After Death, we were like tuned to D. So when we played Nocturnus songs, Nocturnus was in E flat. So we always did the Nocturnus songs in D. So they didn't sound exactly right. You know, they were a little different sounding and a little lower tuning like that. So when we did Nocturnus A.D., I told all the guitar players we're going to have to tune back up to E flat, because I want everything to sound just like it did on the key, you know, style-wise.
Right.
And then I wanted to continue the lyrics. So I did. I took 4 songs like I did off of the key. There's 4 basic songs that really have the key story, the last 4 songs. So what we did with Nocturnus A.D. on Paradox, the last 4 songs are the continuation of that. The first 2 songs on the key is Lake of Fire and Standing in Blood, which they kind of make a little story together. So the first song on Paradox is called Seizing the Throne. It's like the 3rd song to those 2 songs. It continues those 2 songs. And of course, Neolithic, that's on the key, we have Paleolithic on Paradox, which is like the next time era in time. So there was several things that I continued on Nocturnus A.D. from the key.
Wow. So I didn't, and you made a comment there too about you know, Dream Theater and, you know, kind of having the, you know, or people, you know, maybe expecting you to be kind of an era with that because that being popular. And so with Nocturnus having more of the key elements, and, you know, like literally the keyboard rather than not the album, but, you know, so it could be almost mistakenly to be more progressive, or at least put you into that crowd. So was there any sort of pressure to become more like, you know, I guess shredding and kind of that progressive element too, or it was just only the drums and vocals thing?
Well, actually with the guitar players, both of them, their favorite stuff was shred metal, you know, Tony McAlpine, Racer X. That's what they listened to mostly. So if you notice, you know, definitely Thresholds became more of a progressive kind of album. It was more progressive metal than death metal. The Key's total death metal, I think, you know, it's like a technical death metal. But Thresholds sort of is more progressive, I would say, like a heavy Dream Theater almost.
Yeah. And was that any was that any just because of the fandom or anything? There was like no pressure from that because of the time or anything. Like, it's been interesting doing too, because like, not to like just go into this long tangent, but like I've done like interviews with a handful of you know, some of the Swedish death metal fame, and a lot of them cite like a lot of the grunge stuff happening and making them kind of almost you know, change their perspective, because, you know, they're being on a record label and you know, basically a product competing with grunge, which would similarly be Nocturnus in a way, being in, you know, in the 90s and all that, where like it was like influential to their at least success to embody, you know, kind of a trend almost, you know, a musical trend. So like, so none of that it was all organic though, the fact that those albums do have that difference between them, would you say?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you know, and it also had the fact that everybody started writing more as far as the whole band. Right. When you had the Key, a lot of this stuff was written by mostly Mike Davis, the guitar parts, and some of it was written by Gino, who had been in the band before that. So we changed a lot of the parts that he had written and made them a little different. But most of the stuff was written by Mike Davis. And the other guitar player, I don't think he wrote anything on the Key. So when we had Thresholds, you had Mike writing, you had the keyboard player writing, and you had Sean wrote some riffs too. So the Thresholds was like a big mix mash. I barely wrote anything on Thresholds. I wrote a couple lyrics to just like a couple of the songs and my drum parts, but I didn't help arrange hardly anything like I usually do. Right. Even back in Morbid Angel, you know, Trey and I sat there for 3 years and wrote a whole bunch of songs, and it was just me and him working on these things day in and day out. You know, we had probably 20 songs back then. And when I left the band in 86, and it was like, he's used all of that stuff over the years. Yeah. So even that Invocation to the Continual one, that's an old song called Morbid Angel from 1986.
Well, I was going to kind of segue to that myself and say, like, if we're going by any chapters in this conversation, that, you know, maybe we should go now take a chance to the turn to the earlier years, because, you know, when you're talking about writing and all that and changing and you know, because like they, you know, have to get a front man because you're playing drums and vocals, and then it wasn't your idea. From there, like it sounded like you had a pretty good hand in writing stuff, and I've heard you talk about the Morbid Angel years and you know, your relationship with Trey and stuff, and kind of being slightly responsible for, you know, young kids to, you know, maybe kind of turn out with the personalities that they became, you know, and stuff. So you're not just a drummer, and especially with Morbid Angel, you were drums and vocals on that as well. So to kind of rewind back to then more, I guess it's probably not your first band, but one of the, you know, collectively known first bands, you know, Morbid Angel, and then, yeah, having that dynamic of writing and all, you know, where does that kind of come into play, you know, being a drummer, though?
Well, back with Morbid Angel, it was we tried out a bunch of singers, and of course the music kind of changed over those first couple of years. From I met Trey in high school in 1981. I met him, and we started jamming early 1982. And the first band that we had was called Ice, and we actually did ICE, and I think he came up with that name, and it I don't remember exactly, but ICE stood for something. I'm not sure. I don't remember what it was that he was thinking about when he came up with that name. But we put together a little band, and we did like the high school talent show. There, you know, it's nice. Kind of, I wish that got recorded because it was pretty cool. But I mean, we were playing stuff like UFO and, you know, Scorpions and Priest and things like that, because you got to think of this was 1982.
Hey, that'd be way better than a high school talent show this day. You know,
songs or something like that. It was not a big production or anything. You know, we just got up there and played.
Yeah.
And after that, we kind of continued it. Well, after that, actually, Trey moved to the other side of town, and because his mom managed apartment complexes, so they had a house at that point, and then she got a job managing an apartment complex, so they moved. And you know, back when you're that young, when somebody moves across town, that's like forever. You know,
yeah.
So there was a few months we didn't jam, and he jammed with some other people, and that's when he hooked up with Dallas, the bass player.
Now, you said you knew him in high school. Did you say what age? Like earlier high school? Like 15?
No, I was a senior, and he was a junior.
Okay. So like 16 to 18, probably about.
Yeah, he came into the high school already, like he was a new student.
Yeah.
I'd for the whole time, but he came in, he was like the new kid, you know, and I was like, oh, this guy's got long hair. He looks like he, you know, so we started, there was a place called the Alley where everybody smoked cigarettes and stuff like that, you know, and hung out.
I want
the hippie kind of people hung out there, you know, that would be, you know, 1979, 80.
Right.
You know. So when I first went into high school, so he smoked cigarettes. I never smoked cigarettes, but he did. So he was in the alley smoking a cigarette one day, and he was a new student. So I started talking to him, and we both liked the occult. We both knew Necronomicon stuff. You know, we both had the book.
Sweet.
And I played drums, and he played guitar, and it was like, wow, you know, let's get together and do something. So we did. And, you know, I worked with them for years. So from 82, and like I said, we took that small break there. Like pretty much the summer of 82 to the beginning of 83. And then we kind of hooked back up, and he already had was jamming with these guys called Death Watch. And the singer was he sounded sort of like Cyrith Ungle.
Okay.
Like their singer had that really strange kind of voice.
Yeah. And raspy.
And he had a bass player. Yeah. And he had a bass player named Dallas, and they had a drummer that was older than them. And he just wasn't, I think he was from like Lakeland or Winter Haven. So it wasn't real close. And he was traveling every weekend, and he wasn't kind of getting what they wanted to do.
Because you were of the Tampa area, or like the suburbs or just truly Tampa?
Well, Lakeland's not part of Tampa. It's like the town next.
Okay. But that's where you guys were, is the Tampa area.
Yeah. Okay. We were all in Tampa. And they were practicing in the apartment complex rep building, you know, the building you can rent, to do things because his mom, was managing the complex. So every Sunday they'd get together and jam in there. And so they invited me out to try out. And so I started jamming with them. And then Charles, the singer, he got into some trouble with drugs and ended up getting like 10 years in jail.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So that's when Dallas took over on the vocals. And he was singing a little bit, but we didn't have a PA or anything. So we were big time into Merciful Fate at that time. That was like the band.
That explains a few things. Morbid Angel.
And so we tried out a singer named Kenny who had a whole PA and light show. He was much older than us. And that's how that thing called The Beginning. I don't know if you've heard that or not. It's on YouTube. You can hear it. We did like a demo with him, and he tried to sing a falsetto like a King Diamond, and it just didn't sound right. We thought we wanted to get a singer like for Morbid Angel that was kind of like a King Diamond, somebody like that. But it just didn't sound right. Right. And Dallas was singing backups, and he was kind of showing Kenny how the words go, because Dallas was writing some of the music back then as well with Trey, and it just didn't work, with Kenny. So Dallas was like, when we heard Dallas's voice, it was like, hey, this works. So he started singing. And then I was at a party, and I met this guy named Richard Burnell at this party. There was a band called Power Surge. They were on Roadrunner Records.
Okay, yeah.
And I think they ended up doing something on Metal Blade after that. But they were a power metal band, and they had this big house on this real popular street in Tampa, and they used to have these huge parties. And we're talking like, 1983. And so I met this guitar player there, and, we were always thinking we should get a second guitar player because Trey loved to play so many leads. There was just bass and drums half the time and nothing else but leads. So I convinced Trey that we needed a guitar player to do some rhythms behind his leads, and then we could do harmonies and things like that. So he went with it, and we got Richard in the band, and Dallas was singing, and we did a couple shows. There's a show called the Power Company Show where Dallas was singing and Richard was singing a couple songs. But when Richard tried to sing, he couldn't play guitar and sing at the same time. So he would always stop playing guitar and then sing, and that wasn't, and then Dallas got in some trouble and went to jail.
Jeez. So
again, we were stuck with, Richard wasn't able to really sing and play at the same time. And we had tried out a couple people here and there. And it was just like, I was kind of fed up with it at that point. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to try to sing. Because I like bands like Exciter.
Yeah.
And their drummer, he's a great vocalist.
Right.
And if he could do that, I think I could do it too, and I understood the lyrics. I helped Trey arrange every song. We sat there and worked on these songs. He would come up, of course, with the rhythms, but I'd be like, let's do this, 10 times here and 5 times here and cut this in half. And, I'm pretty good at doing that kind of stuff with this. I guess, since I'm a drummer, I know how to arrange songs. And so we arranged a bunch of stuff, and I started singing because I knew all the lyrics, and we had Richard. Then we got another bass player named John Ortega he was from Winter Haven, that Winter Haven Lakeland area, and we did a couple shows like the Rocky Point Beach Resort show. That's like a real popular thing on Facebook. I don't know if you've seen that show or not, but we did a couple shows, and we recorded. Well, I knew this guy in Brandon, which is a little suburb of Tampa, and he was a singer, and his name was Mike too, Metal Mike. Well, he had moved, and he called me one day and said, "Hey, I'm jamming with this band called Barren Cemetery, and the bass player has a record label called Goric Records." And I said, "Cool," and he's like, he knows you guys and he knows Massacre, and he's like, he wants to sign both of your bands, and he's got a bunch of money, a backer, and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, this sounds cool. So he sent us a contract, and it happened to be David Vincent.
Nice.
So David Vincent signed Morbid Angel on his label, Goric Records. And that's when we went up to North Carolina, Charlotte, and recorded the Abominations of Desolation record.
Right. In 86, right?
Right, exactly. That was like in April of 86. April, May, right around in there. And then
with the intent, and that was the intention to be an album, correct?
Oh yeah, it was a record contract. I have the record contract.
Okay.
I actually have the record contract still.
There's a little bit of discrepancies there as far as the details, correct? If you ask certain individuals, they might get a different story.
Yeah, you will definitely. It seems like that. I don't know why.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that until recently.
Yeah, I mean, I have the record contract. We signed a record deal, and we went up there and recorded. There was a budget,
right?
And we recorded in Charlotte. And actually, Bill Matoyer, who worked with Metal Blade on the first Slayer record, first Metallica, we worked on a bunch of records. All the Lizzie Borden stuff.
Oh, of course.
Was hired.
He's a Scott Burns of his own, or hell, probably a bigger, name.
Right. Yeah. So he actually was the one who engineered the record.
What did he did? Bill Matoyer did Abominations?
Yep. Yeah. He
I just must have forgot that. Or they don't know that. That's
a lot of people don't know.
No. I mean, okay, I'm one of them. I thought
had him fly in from California to Charlotte.
Yeah, he's from LA then, I think, right?
Yeah, he still is.
And so did you have to go to North Carolina because that's where David Vincent was from, right?
Right.
Because that's how people often will say that Morbid Angel isn't Florida death metal because I guess because of the David Vincent connection. They'll say Morbid Angel's from North Carolina. I don't know if you ever heard that before. I've heard that before anyway.
I have heard that, yeah. They lived there for probably 2 years or so.
Well, okay, I guess that makes sense, yeah, because he would run probably up there before he made the move or something like that. But okay, so I had no idea, though, that was for the first record, that it was on his label, and then you went to North Carolina because obviously that's where he's from then. Okay, so then what went wrong? How did that, not become the first full-length album and just have the story of what, that you usually hear?
Well, what basically happened was when we finished recording, David looked at everybody and said, all right, you guys go home, and I'm going to keep Trey here for the mixdown. Now, that was never discussed beforehand.
Wow.
Yeah, and being that I did half the album, I did the vocals and the drums. All you got left is guitar and bass.
Right.
So here I am. I got all these ideas for my vocals that I wanted to do and things like that.
Sure, yeah.
And this guy's telling me, go home. We're going to mix the record without you.
Oh, man, I would have been pissed.
And he sent me and Johnny and Richard back, and he kept Trey there by himself with Bill Matoyer, of course, and they mixed the record the next week, and we had to go back to Tampa. We weren't allowed to stay there. And when Trey came, he was just a different person completely. And what I found out was David had just fired their guitar player in their band, and the whole who he was Steve. Right? Was Skeletor from Halloween. He was playing with David in his band. He was their guitar player, and I think he actually quit. But Steve Shoemaker.
Okay.
Yeah. So he quit, and David was looking for a guitar player.
Wow.
And of course, he saw Trey play guitar. He was like, "This is going to be my guitar player." So part of him keeping Trey there for that week, he hounded Trey, because Trey told me when he came back, he hounded him to join his band, saying, "Oh, this record, the bass is terrible on it, and you need to get a different bass player." But I don't want to do it, because he played bass, and he didn't want to play in Morbid Angel at that point. He didn't want to be on the Abominations record, so he said, "I know a bass player I can get for you guys, but you need to get rid of that bass player and this and that." But Trey was adamant about not quitting Morbid Angel to join David's band.
Wow.
So yeah, when Trey came back though, he really was a different person. Like that week he was gone. I don't know what happened, but he came back. He was totally hardly talked to us. We had a band house that we practiced at, and he was the only one that didn't live there. He lived in the apartment complex with his mom still, but we practiced there and everything. And he would just come there every night and practice with us, but go home. But the other three of us lived there. You know, Johnny, me, and Richard.
Right.
We all had a room there and lived there. And we wanted Trey to live there, but he didn't want to. You know, he liked being at his house with his mom there. So anyway, so that kind of happened. And Trey came back and said, we got to fire our bass player, Johnny. I was like, why? You know, what's wrong? Oh, David says the bass is terrible on this album and it ruined the whole album, and that we're going to get this other guy, Sterling Scarborough from Atlanta, and he's going to redo the bass tracks once he learns everything.
This is David Vincent saying that, not the.
Yeah, well, we did that Rocky Point Beach show after we recorded Abominations, and if you watch the show, you'll see I announced that we have a record coming out.
Wow!
So at that point, the record was still going to come out. Everything was going to be good. We got Sterling to play bass, and we did another show after that unfortunately never really got videotaped or anything. But we did a show with Sterling, and then and he was learning the songs, and some of those three Incubus songs were going to be Morbid Angel songs, because when Sterling joined the band, he said, I want to, you know, do my Incubus songs in Morbid Angel. And Trey was like, at first he didn't want to do it, but he kind of, when he saw the songs, and there's a practice tape you can hear on YouTube with Sterling, and we're playing Reanimator's Mutilations as Morbid Angel.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool, you know. So we were going to do all that stuff, those three Incubus songs, probably a few more that he had too, in Morbid Angel. So everything was actually going really well at that point. The album was still going to come out. Sterling was going to re-record all the bass tracks. That's why the album didn't come out earlier. And
I see that. Okay.
And then one day I was at work, and I was working close to Trey's apartment complex. So I said, oh, you know, I'll stop by Trey's house for lunch and see what's going on. So I pull into his apartment complex, and there's my girlfriend's car.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? You know? And so I walk up to the front door, and I put my ear to the door, and all I could hear was a TV going.
Oh, boy.
So I went back and I kicked the door open. I broke it off the hinges, and they were on top of each other on the couch, just kissing, going at it. They still had their clothes on, but they were kissing. So I don't know how long, because I never really found out if this was the first time it happened, or
how long were you with this girl?
Me? Yeah. Probably about 8 or 9 months.
Okay.
So I had no idea.
No,
you know,
no.
I didn't know. I had a steady job, so I went to work every day. He didn't work, and she was a waitress at a Hooters, so she worked at night. So, you know, during the day.
Oh boy.
I don't know if it was an ongoing thing, or that was the first time, or what. But
wow.
You know, I broke the door open. I found him, and I just kind of, there was a lot of yelling and arguing, and I left because I was at work, you know, and so I left. And then that night, Trey came to pick up his guitar stuff. He quit. He said, basically, it's over.
He quit Morbid Angel.
No, well, he quit playing with us.
Okay.
Because Morbid Angel was his name.
Oh.
And he said, well, I've been talking to David Vincent, and he always wanted me to join his band, so I think I'm going to go to North Carolina and join up with him, but I'm keeping my name.
Okay.
And I got really mad, and I beat the fuck out of him. You know, I was willing to say, look, you know, I was mad, of course, but I was willing to kick her to the curb and just still keep Morbid Angel going and just be a man about things. And when he said that it was over, that he was going to quit and all this because of something that he did anyway, I got pissed off and I beat the hell out of him. And Sterling was like laughing at him while I was beating him up. And then Richard ran in his room and closed the door. And
wow.
I was throwing him against the wall and hitting him. And I beat the hell out of him really bad.
Damn.
And about 2 days later, Richard was like, oh, I've been talking to Trey, and he's going to go up to North Carolina, and I think I'm going to go with him. Because David's got all this money, and he's got backers, and he's got this and that, and he's got the label. And now that the album's not going to come out anymore, you know, I was like, whatever, dude, so he did. And that's when Sterling and I stayed together, and we got Gino as a guitar player and did Incubus.
What was your communication then with David, though? Like, because it seems like you were just like dismissed of any authority that you had when you had a lot of it,
Yeah. Well, like the weird thing was, we got the record deal because of me, because I knew the singer that David was working with at the time, Mike, because he was from Brandon. He was the one that called me and said, hey, this guy David has a record label. So if it wasn't for me, we wouldn't have got on Goric Records in the first place. We would have never even known who David Vincent was.
Right.
And turns out that he tried to get Cam to join the band and kicked out Mike, the singer, as well, when Steve quit, the guitar shoemaker. So David needed a vocalist and a guitar player. And he wanted Cam from Massacre, and he wanted Trey from Morbid Angel.
Huh.
So that's what really, went down with that whole situation. And so when Trey and Richard left, Sterling and I were just like, okay, now we still got Incubus. He said, it's my band, so I'll, and I was like kind of fed up with everything. So I said, okay, let's just do it, And so that's how Incubus kind of came about from Morbid Angel. Like,
but how did you not then, was it discussed about who would do vocals then? Because, why didn't you do vocals, especially having Abominations under your belt?
Well, I mean, at that point, Abominations was not going to be released.
But it was still recorded,
Yeah, it was definitely recorded, but it was not going to be released anymore.
Yeah.
And Sterling had wrote all the lyrics in Incubus. They were his songs. He wrote the music. He wrote the lyrics, everything. It was all his idea. And I was just like fine with it at that point. I kind of just wanted to take a break and just kind of play some drums, because the Incubus stuff was a lot faster.
Oh, yeah. It's fast.
Morbid Angel at the time.
Right.
I kind of was like, I don't know if I could, if you listen to what Sterling's singing on there, we were playing those songs so fast, even he wasn't catching all the words, like in Reanimator's Mutilation. If you read the lyrics,
Right.
and it was hard for me to try that stuff, because actually what was funny is when he joined Morbid Angel and we were doing Reanimator's Mutilations, I was singing it.
And you're talking about God Died on His Knees.
Right.
Was that just a demo tape, or was that all? Because it came out on 7-inch. Because like even Abominations is actually confusing. Like I'm in my 30s, so like as a fan that's like, I don't know, can encompass the halfways with technology, and so even like encompass slightly the old days of pen and paper and fan clubs and all that good stuff. I can also comprehend like getting in records and stuff. So like I'm confused though. Like what was the dynamic? I guess being later, presumably that I had maybe a bootleg to introduce me, because that was also a bootleg, like heavily bootlegged as well. So like, was it a 7-inch or was it just a demo first?
It was just a demo.
Okay.
We did it in one night at a studio. We just went in there and knocked it out. And the funny thing is, when we were practicing those songs as Incubus, just Sterling and Gino and myself, we had a PA, but he never sang. So we never even heard his voice. We never heard any stuff from Atlanta that he had done prior.
All right. the stuff David hailed so much.
Angel. We were doing, we did Engulfed and Reanimators in Morbid Angel. So we were starting to work on God Died on His Knees, the third song. And Sterling had a few more too. He had several songs. I don't know how many he had exactly, but he had probably a good set list of songs at least. And so we were working on them, but he never sang. So until we went into the studio and recorded, we never heard his voice. So, I kind of like to sing stuff that I write, and Trey wrote a lot of the Morbid Angel stuff, of course, too, more than I did actually, but it was like, we were there when we wrote the stuff, together. Right. So when I started singing it, I added stuff in all over the place so that I could sing it, rearranged it a little bit, if you listen to when Dallas was singing some of those songs, and then when I was singing them, it kind of changed. You could tell on Abominations,
right,
from the live stuff that we did before that. So it was a progressive thing that it kept kind of changing, especially with Morbid Angel. We kept kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but progressing, I guess, and changing. And like that last bit that we did with Sterling was phenomenal sounding. We were doing the Incubus songs, we were doing Morbid Angel stuff, and it was like he was a really good bass player. So we had stepped up our game quite a bit after we recorded Abominations. And when Sterling wanted to do Incubus, I was like, well, I'm fine with it, because I was still going to play drums, and I liked the music, and we were already playing it. But I did sing Reanimators and stuff like that when we were doing it in Morbid Angel.
I'm curious then, because I wanted, like, it seems then maybe to put it in perspective, like lyrically then, like Nocturnus, After Death, like all the stuff that you would be more, having a pen and writing lyrics to, it's not as much of the, I guess, satanic edge that would have been Morbid Angel, would have been Incubus, and some of that could, well, not actually, I was about to say some of that could be youth, but obviously with Morbid Angel, it wasn't so much, and that was kind of an ongoing theme. So is it safe to say that more of the satanic edge isn't entirely your influence as it is other guys?
Well, not really. I mean, in Morbid Angel, the songs that I wrote the lyrics to was like Demon Seed,
yeah,
Hell On, Chapel of Ghouls, stuff like that. And the more Necronomicon lyrics were actually what Trey wrote, because he was heavily into the book at that time. And so I wrote the more blasphemous kind of stuff, and he wrote the more Necronomicon kind of lyrics in Morbid Angel. When Sterling came in, his lyrics were just total Lovecraft horror stuff,
right, and
totally evil. So he had great lyrics. So like God Died on His Knees, engulfed horror, Reanimators, Mutilations. He had great lyrics. So I was like, fine with him doing all his own lyrics, because he had already had most of that stuff written anyway. We were just kind of learning it and throwing our own, essence into it, of course, too. But so that's what happened there. And then when I did Nocturnus, the first version of Nocturnus had Vincent Crowley in it.
Yeah.
And he was in a band called Entity before that. And Entity had broke up, and Incubus had broke up, and the bass player, Richard Bateman, he had just left. He was in Agent Steel at the time, touring with them. And he said John Cyrus was such a weirdo that he quit in the middle of a tour and came back to his house in Tampa. And he had just quit Agent Steel. So all three of us had just quit our bands and we're like, okay. And I came up with the name Nocturnus, and I said, I'm going to do my own band this time, and I'm going to sing and write all the lyrics. That way I don't have to worry about anybody else saying this or that, or, so but the thing that happened with the early Nocturnus was Vince had a bunch of songs that were really good from Entity. So when we did some of the early Nocturnus stuff were actually Vince's songs from Entity, and he had written the lyrics, but I was singing everything.
Wow.
So, because I think in Entity he had a singer for that band. He wasn't singing back then, and he was playing guitar. So he played guitar, and the first version of Nocturnus was just a 3-piece. It was me, Richard Bateman, and Vince. And then Gino came back into the picture, who was in Incubus. And we became a 4-piece and did that first demo. And 2 of the songs were Vince's songs, and 2 of them were mine, the lyric-wise. So, but when Vince quit, he couldn't get along with Gino. When Vince quit and he actually moved out of Florida because he hated the heat too. He really hated the heat here, and he wasn't getting along with his parents, so he just kind of left Florida altogether.
But he lives in Ohio now. He lives in Columbus, Ohio. I've ran into him a few times. Vincent Crowley. I've ran into him a few times. So
he's but back then, you know, he just kind of was fed up with it. He didn't get along with Gino at all.
Huh.
And so he just kind of quit and left. And when that happened, all the songs that were his, you know, went with him. So even though they were Nocturnus songs, he took them and they became Acheron songs. So at first they were Entity songs, then they became Nocturnus songs, and they became Acheron songs. Same songs.
Wow.
So yeah, it was kind of a weird progression how it happened that way.
Well, so speaking of songs and stuff, sorry to cut you off. I want to soon get into some of the fan questions because they kind of correlate with where you're at with some of the timeline of stuff. But I wanted to ask you then, because you're talking about a lot of members like Vincent Crowley, you know, and then Acheron. Like I knew about a lot of this camaraderie formulating the, you know, as a fan, like the classic scene. But like I didn't know some of the story, I guess, that like I guess makes it even closer than I comprehended it to be. So you said earlier though that there were Morbid Angel songs that you had worked on that were never used in your time in the band. So I was curious, what songs were those, and like, do you remember what, like, were they on like even later albums then? Like, it sounded like it almost went further into like, you know, third, fourth album era.
Oh yeah, like Invocation of the Continual one was like on what, their fourth or fifth record. So
Wow.
So about half of the stuff on Altars was old.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, that one's an obvious one. Okay, yeah.
I think the one called, was it Damnation?
Okay.
That was something different we were working on. Like I said, there's a rehearsal that's on YouTube you can find from the summer of '86, and you'll hear, you know, a couple of those songs.
Wow.
That were new stuff for us that we were working on, and you'll hear Reanimator's Mutilations, all done by Richard, Trey, and me and Sterling. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot. I mean, I think, what was it? Well, pretty much if you listen to Abominations, everything except for Demon Seed was used.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess
everything.
So. Yeah, because even like Angel of Disease, I guess, was later but then it was what, on Covenant?
Right.
So
Angel of Disease later. Welcome to Hell became Evil Spells. Like I said, we were working on that Damnation song when at the end there, you know, everything except for Demon Seed. And Demon Seed was one of those songs that was just like a 2.5 minute crazy thing with 2 or 3 rhythms in it. So I could see why Trey didn't want to really continue with that one.
Yeah. So, well, then now that time has gone by and, you know, obviously some shitty things that you could be probably missing credit for. I mean, I don't even need to probably have to go back to say what was it like when what Abominations came out 3 years later. So I guess I'll just ask an easier 2020, literally the year as we do this interview, that, you know, looking back, what is your relationship like with Trey? Do you even talk to him?
Well, it's weird I mean, it was like, even when that happened, I was kind of in that point, you know, back in the '80s where you had a problem with somebody, you got into a fight with them, dusted yourselves off, and then you became friends again, you know? And nowadays you have a fight.
Yeah, you get the internet text.
Yeah, you know, but nowadays they either sue you or shoot you if you get in a fight with somebody. Somebody's going to jail, somebody's getting sued, somebody's getting shot. Yeah. You know. So it's not like
they just
like it used
first.
Yeah. So I mean, I kind of expected that after I kind of beat him up that we'd still be friends and work our shit out, you know, and it just didn't happen that way. So there was a long while where we didn't talk at all, and then we started talking a little bit, and then Morbid Angel got really big, and then he kind of became really reclusive and didn't hardly talk to anybody for a long time. And just what's really strange is back in December, they played in Tampa, and I went to the show, Morbid Angel, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I talk to Steve all the time, Tucker. He's, you know, I actually get along with him. I've talked to all the other guys, And, you know, I'm friends with Pete, Commando Pete, of course, you know, Sandoval. And, you know, it's weird. So when they played in Tampa last December, I went to the show, and a friend of mine, Anthony, he knows Trey well too. You know, he's one of the few people that did hang out with Trey, and he kind of brought me back to where the bus was, and there was Trey, and we started talking, and he was a little offish at first, but then I handed him a Paradox CD and gave him my phone number, and about a week later, I get a text from Trey. He's like,
"Oh wow,
dude, I like this album. I've been listening to it," and he texted me, and so we started actually texting and talking again. So it's weird with him. Like, we'll talk for a couple days through text, and then I won't hear from him for a while. So
wow.
Actually,
this did take a while though to get back in touch with him. Then over about 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. But like right now at this point, you know, I can text him right now and talk to him, and we'll start having a conversation about this or that, or, you know, whatever it is. And he likes talking about some weird stuff like politics sometimes, so guns, things like that. So, you know, we even talked about BMX bikes and that lately. So the one thing we don't talk about much is music. So, I mean, it's cool though. You know, I mean, I always thought it would be neat to get Richard and me and Trey back together again.
Yes.
And Richard was going to, you know, he was working and doing, I still don't know what happened to Richard. You know, what really happened to Richard. I don't know if he killed himself or something happened, overdose or what, because his family had a closed funeral, would not speak to anybody about what happened to him. And I had talked to him 2 weeks before he was found dead. And he was working in a restaurant, and he had cut his hand really bad, and it was like really swollen and stuff. And I was like, dude, you need to go. It was his birthday. And I said, dude, you need to go to the hospital. He goes, well, I did go to the hospital, and he had a really bad infection going on his finger from getting it cut at work. And that was the last time I talked to him. And he asked me if I would play drums for that Mosaic Covenant project that he was doing. And I said, sure, you know. And I said, he was riding a bicycle to work. He didn't have a car because he had lost his driver's license. And he seemed that he was really trying to do well. He was drinking water. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't doing any drugs at all for months. And he was going to come over, and we were going to jam again. And then I was going to try to get Trey to come over, and the three of us to kind of get the three of us together again.
Right.
And kind of had hoped that might happen, you know. Then all of a sudden, Richard's dead.
Wow.
You know, and I could not. I have tried. Some of the other guys that he was jamming with at the time that saw him just like a couple nights before.
Nobody knows.
You know, nobody knows anything.
Still.
And I mean, nobody's been able to find out what happened to him.
Wow.
It's strange. I don't know if he fell off the wagon, or something else happened. I have no clue. So, you know, several people talked to Richard's sister who found him, you know, and she will not come out and say anything about what happened. So it's a very big mystery. And, you know, if somebody knows, definitely let me know, because, I mean, there was a girl that was talking to him who was going to come visit him in January or December of that year. And she had just talked to him like the night before it happened, and he was fine. Wow. So very strange situation there with Richard. But I had always had hope that, you know, me and Trey and Richard would get back together again, and at least, if not anything, just at least jam once, you know?
Yeah.
Even if it's only in my rehearsal room, you know. Who knows? I mean, you never know with Trey. You know, I invited him over, but he had gotten to that DUI, and so he's not driving right now. So, and he lives kind of far away. He lives, I think it's some like Newport Richey area somewhere. He's not in Tampa anymore. He's in a town close to Tampa, but not real close, maybe an hour away.
Oh, okay.
So it's, I've invited him over, and he said he'd like to come over sometime. So you never know. We'll probably hang out again, one of these days.
Yeah.
So you never know what'll happen in the future with these things. So, but it would be fun to just at least jam again, because I always thought that maybe me and Trey and Richard could get back together and maybe have somebody like Steve play bass and just do the Abominations record and do some festivals.
That'd be cool.
Of just that record.
Yeah.
And nothing, we get up there, play 45-minute set, just everything on that record, and just for old time's sake, kind of, not that it would be Morbid Angel.
No, you could pull a David Vincent with the Am I Morbid thing, and you could call it Abominations. Really.
I kind of thought maybe something like that could one day happen.
Yeah.
Which would be really cool. And I didn't want to say that I would be back in Morbid Angel. I wanted it to be just its own little thing that possibly we could do this, just do some festivals, stuff like that.
Well,
and just do the old stuff the way it is, on the record.
Well, yes, and there's a few questions that kind of coincide with that, so I don't want to let that opportunity get too far off course here, and then kick it into our next segment, if we even had them, here on the show, where we're going to dive into some fan questions. So for anybody that's in the fan club, that's why you want to be on the fan club. You get access, and I'll reach out to you beforehand to be able to submit your questions. So Jacob Flores wants to know a few questions. Let me get here. The first one was more appropriate. Nocturnus was on a Hard and Heavy video. They played Lake of Fire on stage. I'm curious as to where this footage was filmed. Do you remember that?
Okay. Oh, yeah, for sure. Cool. We were on the Grind Crusher tour with Napalm Death and Godflesh, and we were in LA. We were going to play, I forgot what the name of the club was, but we were setting up to do sound check in the afternoon, and all of a sudden this big camera crew with these really professional like TV cameras came in, and it was a magazine called Hard and Heavy.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we're going to do a Grind Crusher special. So we were like, cool, and we want to get a couple guys from the band and do an interview. So the interview, you see, was myself and Lou, the keyboard player, and that was done on the tour bus that we had. So when you see us sitting there on that little couch thing, that's actually was our tour bus. So we did the interview in there, but I think we did that after sound check. But anyway, they filmed our sound check, and we did Lake of Fire.
Oh, wow.
And I think they also filmed it that night, us playing it. But most of the footage, if you watch it, you can actually see like Napalm Death's drum set behind mine. So they filmed some people think it's from the record, the audio track, but it was actually the sound check that we did that day.
Oh, wow.
So the Lake of Fire was our sound check in California. Summer of, I guess April of 1991.
And sorry, I was listening and keeping track here. Bjorn wanted to know what happened with the production on the key. I love the album the way it is, but compared to many other albums recorded in Morrisound around the same time, the production is kind of underproduced.
Yeah, there was a couple things that happened with that. Like I said, we were kind of unprepared to go in. We didn't have like my drums. I had a concert toms, so they had no bottom heads, and my drum set was all beat up. I had I didn't have new drum heads on there. We went in very unprepared, and when we went into Morrisound, before we went into Morrisound, Tom came out and watched us practice once. And so we were practicing for Tom, and after we played a song, he looked at Jeff Estes, our bass player, and said, "Can you play that bass part? I want to hear what you're doing there." And Jeff was drunk, and he was like, "Oh, well, man, I really, I'm kind of buzzed right now." So I was and he's like, and he tried to play the bass part a couple of times, and he blubbed it by himself really bad. and he set his bass down and just left.
Wow.
And this like 2 weeks before we were going to record the album. We did not see him again until the morning of Morrisound, the first day of recording. So I pull into the studio, Morrisound Studio, the first morning. You know, there's Jeff in the parking lot at like 8 o'clock in the morning, drunk already, fighting with his girlfriend. He comes in the studio, can't play the bass tracks. Again, takes his bass and he leaves. So here we are in Morrisound with a week booked, and the bass player just walks out.
Wow.
Because he can't play the tracks. We were like, oh shit, what are we going to do? You know? And Dig was there, everything. It was crazy, you know, and it was like, what are we going to do? And so Mike Davis was like, well, you know, I wrote most of these riffs, so I guess I'm going to have to play the bass. And he's not a bass player, he's a guitar player. So literally, we went ahead and recorded with just guitar and drums instead of guitar, bass, and drums. And then Mike had to dub in all the bass parts. And he was literally, after he did his guitar parts, he would literally go in one of the rooms in Morrisound by himself and sit there and learn all the bass parts to every song. And then he came in there, and of course he played them with a pick, and Jeff would play with his fingers. So the bass wasn't what it was supposed to be at all, you know, and it sounded more like a guitar playing bass. And so we mixed the bass really low.
Wow.
And like I said, the drums, my drums were in terrible condition. I cracked cymbals. I didn't have that much money back then, and we didn't really have a budget to buy all new equipment to go in the studio. And so that's basically that. We had really shitty equipment. You know, drums were concert toms. Tom didn't even want to use my drum set at all. He was like, I can't record with concert toms. You know, you got to have bottom heads on these and blah, blah, you know. And I had cracked cymbals, and it was just
great.
No bass, and just everything that went wrong pretty much went wrong, you know.
Yeah.
But we still got it done. But like I said, the bass was mixed really, really low. You can barely hear it on there. And it's not even Jeff playing it. Mike had to end up playing all the bass parts. And he was literally learning them in the studio. I mean,
yeah,
he knew what to play because he wrote the guitar parts, most of them. But it was just like a mess. You know, we were kind of stuck. We had Dig was here. He flew from England. You know, we had Tom, which is a total professional kind of guy, you know, and I wasn't comfortable with that. You know, I felt more comfortable with somebody like Jim or Scott, you know, and it made me more nervous, you know. So plus that was done to tape. That's no Pro Tools or anything, right. You know. That was the old mixing board at Morrisound. There's no Pro Tools on that. There's no triggers, no samples. Nothing. That's the real drums. Everything's real. There's no fixing of drums. There's no, you know, nothing. That key recording is super raw. And that's why it sounds so different than anything that's ever come out of Morrisound. But now you take Thresholds. I still had the same drum set. So Tom said, I'm not going to let you bring this drum set into Morrisound. So he rented a Yamaha drum kit for Thresholds, and I played on that. So I didn't even play on my own drum set for Thresholds. It was they had the new mixing board in there. They had, I had a drum set, a full brand new drum set to use. So that's why Thresholds sounds like a Morrisound recording, and the key doesn't.
That brings it all together. This one's an interesting question from Mongo. Would Mike have played on the, oh man, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but the Illud Divinum Insanus if Trey had asked you to for years ago? I'm presuming you know what record I'm talking about with that horrendous pronunciation. The unwidely acclaimed Morbid Angel Return album. Would you have played on it if you were asked to?
I don't think it would have happened that way if I was in the band.
It would have been what a way better record, I'm sure. It would have probably been some goth record like it was.
Well, no, the funny thing about that record is a lot of people think it had a lot to do with David Vincent, but the music is actually all written by Trey, just about every bit of it. David wrote all the lyrics, but Trey wrote most of those songs.
Huh. So is that a side of Trey that you weren't surprised to see?
Well, I mean, when I knew Trey, he was a different person. You know, he was totally into Merciful Fate, stuff like that, you know, Slayer, things like that. Now, I don't know that Trey got into a big era where he was into techno, and I think he still is.
Hell, was he even Trey to you as a friend, or was he George, by his real name?
Well, I mean, I always just called him Trey, you know, because he really hated that name, George. He really didn't like that. I mean, if you want to make fun of him, that's what you called him.
Oh,
you know,
really?
if you were joking around with him,
okay.
And he would get really upset. So
it's like your mom calling you by your first and middle name.
Right. And I just called him Trey, but the Trey I knew is not the Trey that is today. You know, he's and anybody will tell you that he's changed quite a bit.
Huh.
You know, he covered up his tattoo. He used to cut himself and do all kinds of crazy, eat worms and do all kinds of stuff in the early days. He doesn't do anything like that anymore. You know?
Right.
So, but he's still Trey, I'm sure, deep inside there. It's just, I think different situations bring different things out in Trey. So he's got his techno side. He loves techno music. And I'm actually surprised that what he didn't sound more techno-y than because to me, Elude has almost a Genitorturers kind of sound to it.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I think a lot of people think that David wrote a lot of that music on there.
Yeah, because they probably agree and think that because of that.
Right. It has more of an industrial feel than techno. So I think Elude would have been a good side project for Trey to do with those songs. And he should have stuck to the more traditional thing with Morbid Angel, you know.
Yeah.
That's my opinion, of course.
Well, Connor wants to know what your opinion is. Well, he had a few questions. Oh, that was Joshua. Well, sorry, Connor. We'll get to Joshua's first question. In your opinion, what is the most underrated metal album?
Underrated?
I guess so. Connor put you under the mark.
I really like the Exorcist Nightmare Theater record.
Oh, sweet. You and Glenn Benton. When put on the spot, that's the record you think of, huh? That's awesome.
You know, as far as saying underrated, you know, I mean, that a lot of people don't know much about that record.
Right.
And what's really strange is just last year, I found out there was a special edition.
I was just going to say, did you know that?
And I bought it. It has the extra disc with all the extra mixes.
I think there's 4. I think there's 4 discs in that, isn't there?
I think there's 3, actually.
3.
I think
3. Maybe there's 4 mixes and only 2 discs. Maybe that's what it is.
I think there's 4 mixes. I think you're right.
Damn.
But
I had no idea.
There's mixes and there's extra songs. And dude, I was like blown away by all that extra stuff that came out. And I remember that record. I had that record when I was in Morbid Angel.
Yeah, it's that old, I guess.
Yeah, it is that old.
Yeah.
You know, and it was the Virgin Steel guys.
Yeah. Well, then I was going to say, did you know about Original Sin?
Yes. Yeah.
Did you know that for a while, or did you know that just kind of because that was also something that just came out again? High Roller Records did the special edition we're talking about. And he also did the Original Sin.
Exactly too much on. I didn't know that record real well, you know.
Okay.
As like the Exorcist record.
Because it sounds a lot like it, only it has a female singer, and then they credit all the other. They credit a bunch of women that aren't on the record, but it's just the singer that's the only difference.
I heard Jack Starr didn't play on Exorcist at all.
Huh.
It was all the other guys that did it. But to me, that record is just phenomenal. I love it. And that's kind of underrated. The solos are amazing. especially when I heard those other mixes of it, I was like, stuff came out that I never even heard before that was hidden in the mixes, kind of basically.
Yeah.
In that, or in the original mix, I should say.
Yeah.
You know, when they mixed it, those couple of versions, I was just like, wow, you know. So I could kind of say that that's a very underrated record.
I'd agree. That's a great. I wasn't expecting that one. I'll give you that for being on the spot. Boom, you pulled one right out. That was and I kept saying Connor said that, which Connor wanted to know what was it like during the Incubus days after Morbid Angel. But I think we kind of covered that. Wouldn't you say it's safe to say that we covered that?
Yeah, I mean that was a band that only really lasted like what five months or so. There wasn't really a lot to it.
I guess that's why there's only just the one demo, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I went to work one day and Sterling and Gino didn't work and they went to the beach and I guess they got really drunk at the beach and were hitting on some girls and Gino said something to Sterling and Sterling said something back and Gino punched Sterling and knocked him out almost completely. Wow. And then Gino ran off down the beach and quit the band. And, and then when that happened, I was just like over the whole thing, you know. Sterling was a maniac. I mean, he was a true crazy guy. Anywhere we went, he would try to start fights with anybody. I mean, he would go to the post office and start looking at people just trying to start fights with them. You know, it was crazy hanging around him because you never knew he was just out of his mind. He was always trying to do something crazy, like to make himself like out there, you know, like he's a maniac, but he really was, though, you know. So, you know, it was like hanging around him, and I don't know what would happen if we had continued that band because he was insane. He really was crazy, you know. I mean, he would just do the craziest things. You know, you just never knew what was going to happen with him. But every time we went out to a club somewhere, you know, there would be a fight because he would start stuff and it was just too much, you know?
Yeah.
So when Gino quit that day, when they got into a fight and Gino punched him, knocked him down and in front of those girls, it just like, that was pretty much the end right there. And I don't know what happened, where Gino went, or how he got back home because they were in Clearwater and this was in Tampa. So, but yeah, so I was just like, you know what? I'm kind of over this whole thing too, you know? And that's when I was like, I'm going to do my own band and write all the lyrics and sing and, you know, kind of keep it my ideas. And that's how Nocturnus started.
Well, then I think this good way to get back to Jacob, who had a question earlier with his last question, and it'll be the last question that we have here for you. I want to know how it was back in the early days of the Florida scene. I guess we kind of went over that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it depends on how early you want to go. Back in the, you know, like say the Morbid Angel time, everybody was kind of doing their own thing. And at first there wasn't really a lot of competition because everybody had their own sound. It wasn't till, I'd say, the mid to late 80s where the competition really started coming in, where everybody wanted to play faster and more technical and stuff like that. So in the earlier days, you'd go to a show, whether it was Sabotage or Morbid Angel or Obituary or who it was, you had the same crowd of people there, you know, from power metal to death metal to whatever. You had a good camaraderie of people that all got along. Right. You know, and it wasn't until the competition started and music started getting faster, the bands started wanting to outdo each other in speed and things like that.
Would you say the competition was the notoriety that the bands were getting with, you know, record contracts and all that stuff?
That had a lot to do with it too, you know, who was selling more records and things like that. And to me, I just wanted to do my own thing and I really didn't care what other people did.
Right.
Because I had ideas and they were always different than what other people were doing. I never wanted to, I mean, besides from wanting to sound like a little bit like Merciful Fate or Angel Witch, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, I had influences for sure.
Right.
But I think the stuff that I do always has its own style, you know, completely. I never wanted to sound like somebody else exactly. you know, and to me, that was always the biggest thing, is to not sound like anybody else.
Right.
You know, everything I wanted to do, I wanted to make sure it didn't sound like somebody else.
So speaking of the scene, though, does that mean then you were, you know, like some of the famous, the fame, I guess would be, you know, Tom, you know, John Tardy or Cam Lee, you know, Chuck, like you knew all those guys?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's still like that. You know, I mean, in Morbid Angel, we did shows with Massacre, Death. We even did a show when I was in Nocturnus. We even did a show with Morbid Angel at one point, you know, so everybody knew everybody back then. And then, of course, the Cannibal Corpse guys moved from, I think they were in New Jersey first, down to Tampa. And, you know, everybody knew everybody. There was a good period where, you know, Deicide was here.
Yeah.
Well, the Malevolent guys were more down south, but they used to be up here all the time hanging out too. And everybody knew everybody. And there was a lot of, you know, the Obituary guys. I mean, the bass player in our band was on the first Obituary record playing bass, Daniel Tucker.
What do you think it was of Florida to kind of have, because, you know what I mean? Like you just said, you know, even like Cannibal Corpse, hell, even when I brought up the Morbid Angel, David Vincent, like, you know, mistakenly North Carolina for location, like there's just very much something that, like, there's only the Florida death metal scene for, like, a definitive sound anyway of that kind of stuff, which, you know, obviously there's a Swedish death metal and there's other areas, but you know what I mean? Like it's one of the few in the United States to have its own region, and particularly that region's not like even something vague. It's like particularly a state, you know, like what do you think of, why is it Florida?
Well, maybe the heat. It just drives us into insanity. It's so hot here.
Yeah.
But, you know, really the funny thing is it actually started out with probably Savatage or Avatar, what they were called before Savatage. Oh. They were huge. Even when they were Avatar, they had these really big crowds and they used to play shows. And then you had Nasty Savage started playing shows and doing crazy stuff. And then, you know, there was this little Orlando scene, you know, with Massacre and Death, and, you know, they were doing their own thing. And then they would start coming to Tampa to play because there weren't a lot of places in Orlando, I think, at the time, but there were a few places in Tampa that were really popular. Like the Brandon Mug was a very popular place, and a place called Ruby's and Sunset Club. So what you had was more clubs in Tampa, so everybody kind of gravitated to Tampa to play, and we all got along back then, so everybody would do shows together, and like the big Rocky Point Beach Resort, you know, it had us, Massacre, Oblivion, Executioner, which was Obituary.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, everybody played that show.
Right,
there was like 10 bands. The Atheist guys, when they were called
Ravage.
Yeah. They were on the show. It was crazy, you know, when you think about that.
Right.
All the bands were on one.
That would have been a hell of a bill. That would be an expensive bill now, like or impossible bill, really.
Yeah, and that was in 1986.
Yeah.
So, and there was a great crowd there. It was at a hotel that had a big stage on the beach, and the funny thing was they were going to demolish the hotel the next month. So this was literally the last show they did there, and the whole hotel was full of metalheads.
Yeah.
And the guy that was running the thing said, "You can do anything you want here to this hotel because they're going to demolish it." We were throwing TVs off the balconies, sticking chairs in the walls and trying to sit on them, and people were walking down the hallways just poking in the wall with their, you know, like breaking holes in the walls because they didn't care, you know.
I think I have that show on YouTube.
It is, yes. There's two versions of it, actually.
Two different angles?
Yeah, there's one back by the soundboard and there's one right up by the front of the stage. So,
okay, and Trey's playing that like white V?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think with the red on it.
Yeah, I had and in the beginning there's somebody like, look at all these posers. And I think Cam Lee's then there. And he's like, what do you think, Cam, or something?
Yeah, and it's funny. David Vincent was actually at that show because, like I said, that was
Scouting out talent, huh?
Yeah, he was walking around. You can see him in the video walking around.
Was that how people knew him though? There's David Vincent like scouting out talent for his label, like because that.
Nope.
But that would have been
Nobody,
like a thing for him coming down from North Carolina, right? Because he was residing in North Carolina, coming down to Florida.
well, but no, not that many people knew him back then.
No, okay. Well, yeah, I
mean,
guess not.
Yeah, nobody knew who he was back then, and I mean, he was down here. He wanted to see Massacre play as well because he was big time into Cam. You know, he liked Cam's vocals a lot.
Oh, well, there's that live recording of Massacre, and Cam's like, David Vincent's here, and you know, this one's Aggressive Tyrant is like, or is his version Progressive Soup?
Yeah, I remember that as a matter of fact.
Really?
But yeah, so yeah, when David came down here for that weekend, he wanted, you know, of course, he had us signed already at that point. We'd already recorded, and he was still after trying to sign Massacre at the time. But they had some, you know, bigger labels like Combat and stuff looking at them at that point.
Yeah.
So they were like, oh, no, we're going to go big time on that one, you know, because of course you can't blame them. They had some really big labels that wanted to sign them at the time, and they did, you know.
Right.
So, you know, that was, but it was, like I said, there was a lot of camaraderie back then. Everybody got along. You know, when I'd go see Sabotage play, or even when they were Avatar, you know, you'd see the same people at the show as a Morbid Angel show or a Nasty Savage show or whatever. You know, nowadays it's like when a band plays, they have their crowd. You know,
right.
Especially these.
Right.
I hate to, you know, like these new metal bands. You know, like these young kids come to these shows now, and it's packed. Like say a Tuesday night, and the place will have 500 kids in there, and they'll watch one band and leave.
Yeah.
You know, and then we'll play, and there'll be like, you know, 100 people there. So it's like, it's crazy, you know, like, you know, it just depends on where. I mean, you know, we do good in Europe and South America, of course, but like here, it's really weird. It's only a few of the bands really draw a really big crowd.
Yeah.
But a lot of this new metal stuff, when these bands come through, the shows are packed. But I don't know any of these people. I go, and I'm like, you know, looking around going,
right,
I don't know anything here.
Where were you at the last good show?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, you know, if a band like Mayhem comes here, it'll be packed, of course. You know, things like that. But a lot of the, you know, like smaller death metal bands, when they come through here, they won't get a big crowd. You know, it's weird. People stay home, but then, you know, Obituary will always bring at least 300 or 400 people, you know, to a show.
Yeah, it's not the same like scene mentality where it's like, you know, you're going because of the scene of whatever music. It's just more like you're saying, yeah, who's your favorite band and if they're playing or not, you know, stick around for that. I don't know. Times have definitely changed. You know, we're definitely not going to be able to look back at these years of music and then fast forward 20, 30 years to then do the Exorcist-esque 4-mix version, or like it has the live tracks or something from, you know, I can just think of like Bay Area with like Ruthie's and like these concert clubs that you get to know about, not even living in the city, but just because you know, you like that region of metal, really, because that would be Bay Area thrash, and then there's German thrash, and then there could be, you know, famous concerts or venues in that scene, and then especially the death metal stuff. So like some of the stuff that you just mentioned, like I've heard those names before, because you see them on those 30 years later releases that are happening. You know, Massacre, hell, there's been a few where it's like compiling stuff, you know. So and obviously there's been several with numerous things that you have done. So but you know, it's just going to be a changing thing for music. Like I think like the fandom is different because you can't seek out that live recording or something that I'd want to hear from 1986. That's an entirely different fan dynamic than 2000 some era where it's like, who cares about the live recording? You know, like.
Well, the difference is like, you know, like these days, every album is perfect sounding because you got Pro Tools.
Yeah.
You know,
doesn't help.
Every albums, you know, are all triggered up and quantized and everything.
Yeah.
You know, and you didn't have that back in the day. Everybody, just went in there and recorded, and what you got was what you got.
Sounds like.
I mean, you can do some stuff with it. It wasn't like you can sit there and make every bass drum sound exactly the same now,
right.
and gate every tom, and if you don't like that snare sound, I got 50 other snare sounds. I can just replace it.
Right.
I just like, it's so different now, because people, when an album comes out now, everything sounds perfect on it because of Pro Tools, pretty much, or a program similar to it. And it's been fixed, a lot of it. Not too many people go in and record the tape anymore and let it go the way it is and work on it from that point. And that's one thing I do want to say is like what we did with Paradox, that, when Jarrett Pritchard, he produced the album and engineered it too. And he had just bought a 24-track tape machine from California, and he brought it into his studio, and I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. 2-inch tape, reel to reel,
Right.
We did Paradox. All the drums were done on 24-track reel to reel.
Nice.
So there's all, cause I use it. My kit is all rototoms. And the last thing I wanted to do is replace those sounds with some other tom. I don't want Metallica's, one drum sound, or,
no, especially that one.
I don't want somebody else's drum sounds on my drums.
Right.
I like my drums because the way they sound. I mean, back when I was like on the key, I didn't have any money to spend on it, so my drums were what they were.
Hey, you said rototoms. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just couldn't help but think of that at least to me, iconic Morbid Angel intro on what song is that?
Azagthoth.
Yeah, I don't know. Is because I don't know. Like is that there's not like a ton of roto stuff, but that section. Like so.
What's funny about that is those aren't rotos. But those are my concert toms, and I actually had a 6, 8, and 10 inch, like form in a triangle, and the little 6-inch drum was like little. It was really small. It was like but it had no bottom head, so it sounded like a rototom.
Okay, that's it. Wow. Okay, the resonance isn't there.
Yeah, with my kit now, I've got like 5 rototoms for my toms and 1 floor tom that's a rototom, and so I get that same sound now, nice. and I like, even Jarrett was like, you want to record the rototoms? I'm like, yeah, I want the real drum sound.
Yeah,
my snare is real, like it's not sampled. And so what you're hearing on Paradox, why a lot of people think it sounded a lot like the key, was because everything's pretty much, especially the drum wise, it's all on 24-track reel to reel. So we put the drums to tape.
Yeah. That'll make a difference.
Gave it that real drum sound.
Yeah. Well,
so there's, it's, I prefer that, I could have went and Pro Tooled it all up and used samples and made my drums sound like whoever I wanted them to sound like, like if I liked Slayer's third album, you can get that snare drum now,
Yeah.
And it's literally like that,
if
you like
totally.
If a drummer's like, I don't like my snare sound.
Yeah, you can change it.
Or 1,000 other snare sounds, they can just go bam, and there it is.
And keep all the rest of the settings you had for everything else. Just you can spend a day.
Change that, I mean, there's always equalization, but you're talking total sound replacement.
Oh, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And then even the attenuation of it, drums are all about, like, at least the fabrication of them can seem more evident when it's it lacks velocities and attacks and stuff like that. So you could really attenuate that so well that's a lot of where you can hide the fact that there will be a day, if there isn't already, that it's like, do you even really need a drummer? I mean, I think that you still do, because there's that human element that everybody still hears and just resonates with. You can't replace the human element no matter what. Digital has proven that.
The one thing with electronic drumming is they still can't get that cymbal sound that sounds real.
Yeah.
That's one thing that almost always gives it away. If you really listen, some people are pretty good with mixing it to make a drum set sound real, but for some reason, I can always, when I listen to the cymbals, I'm like, no, that's not, that's somebody was using an electronic kit for this one, and then I find out, yep, or they sample replaced everything. So
that's years of drumming and listening to that hi-hat and those abrasive cymbals in the real room, just, destroying your hearing, probably.
I kept telling Jarrett, turn up the cymbals. Yep. I'm like, I want loud hi-hats. I want, I hate you can hear a record and all you hear is kick and snare, and you barely hear the cymbals. You can hear some of the crashes, but a lot of times the ride and the hi-hat get really lost in a lot of these recordings now. Yeah. And I just love a big drum sound. Nobody likes reverb anymore.
Yeah.
Especially death metal vocals. Nobody uses effects on their vocals a lot of times anymore.
Right.
Most death metal guys want it dry as hell. I still love, being in the abyss when I sing,
Yeah.
I love it. That's what gives me my sound. That I like that delay and echoey, spacey, big room sound.
Well, this has been really cool to catch up with you, Mike. Like, you're obviously an icon within the death metal or just metal community, period. And so to kind of just even hear stuff like that, like up to the date where, like, yeah, you're excitedly recording things, taking it, upon yourself, and then continue to, innovate with it, just even do it, period. And then obviously remembering back to the old days, like it's been really cool. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this. I know your dog is definitely appreciating it. I cut away from there for a second. You're getting mad love from there. So, from your dog and the End of the Darkness and Reaper Metal community, we're all happy that you're here. So I appreciate that. And for everybody here that's watching, if you didn't, you've made it this hour and 32 minutes into it, well then shit, man. Then you are definitely a candidate to do everything that I shouldn't have to tell you to do here on YouTube, but I will tell you, because you need reminders. You need to go to ReaperMetalProductions.com and catch every single episode of Into the Darkness, whether it be video and audio, because they're conveniently linked there and archived and available to you very conveniently. So go there. Links are in the description. But hey, you want to stay here on YouTube, then you need to like, subscribe, and comment. Do all that stuff that everybody tells you to do and remind you of over and over again, because that's what keeps this going, and that's what gives us the power to talk to you next time.